This is Alex, and welcome to Barely Braided, where we're taking a deep, deep dive into foster care, adoption, and all things parenting, even the sticky stuff. Welcome to episode 36. One of my very favorite things about being a podcast host is that I get the chance to talk to and meet other foster parents, and they don't even have to live anywhere near me, which is really exciting. At first, I was really excited to say that I had foster family friends all over the United States. And then in the last few months, I also had the opportunity to speak with some friends in the UK across the river. And today, I am so pleased to welcome our guest from up north. I believe this is our very first Canadian guest, our friend Erin Bouchard. Hey, Erin.
Hey, Alex. Thank you for having me on.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, me too. I feel bad that we were talking before the episode started about our pets, and then I cut you off and was like, no, we need to get this recording, because what happens is I start to go off on these tangents, and I'm like, man, I wish we would have got that recorded. So I think the world deserves to know about your gigantic, almost soon to be gigantic dog.
Yes. We got a puppy during COVID like everyone else. And she is a St. Bernard Great Pyrenees mix. So she is a very, very big dog. Actually, one of our former foster child chose her name. So her name is Oreo because she's black and white.
Oh, that is so cute. My very favorite dog stage, and I wonder if your dog is past this stage, but when they're starting to get really big, but they're still clumsy.
Yes, she will like fully sit on the kids or jump on the bed and like lay on us and not even realize that she is well over 100 pounds. And like, you cannot lay on me like that. That hurts. But she's just so cute and so friendly and loves people.
Oh, we love dogs. So let's talk a little bit about, well, specifically, where in Canada do you live?
So I am in Ontario, Canada, and I'm not far from the Port Huron, Michigan border. So we're just about half an hour from the border.
Okay, this might be a really dumb question, but when you go over the border into Michigan, is there anything special you need to do? Is there like a toll booth, or how does that work?
Yeah, so right now it's closed because of COVID. So we haven't been able to cross over into the States for over a year now. But because we are so close, like such a border town, we go over quite a bit and do shopping and go out for dinner. And there is like, you have to have a passport to get across, and then you have to stop and pay a toll and tell them what you're doing. And then if you purchase anything over in the States, you have to claim it on your way back into Canada.
How much is the toll?
I think it's like $3.50 or something like that. It's like a couple bucks. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow. That's interesting. So, and I'm wondering too, are there people who live, like, let's say live in Michigan, but work across the border, or vice versa?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is some like nurses, especially some in the medical field, that would live in Canada and cross over to work in the States. I do know of a few people who work across the border.
So they basically just aren't able to get to their jobs since COVID,
so they
right?
Can cross if you are going for work purposes, and like trucks still are allowed to cross. So there is still like a running border, but you have to have like a reason. So if like you were just going to go shopping, they would turn you away and tell you can't.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. So do you know when it's going to reopen?
I don't. They're saying like the earliest it would be is like late summer, early fall, but it'll probably still be a while. We're real behind in Canada right now with our vaccines. We're still in full lockdown here, so it'll probably be a bit.
Oh, really? Okay. See, I didn't even think about that. There may be differences between the US and Canada when it came to like the amount of lockdown. I just feel like you all are so close and things are like kind of similar, that the COVID situation would be similar, but I guess that's not the case, huh?
Yeah, unfortunately it's not. Yeah, we are still in a full lockdown where like all of our businesses are closed. We are under a stay-at-home order, and we're slowly we are catching up with our vaccinations. But because we don't make any here in Canada, we have been relying on them to be shipped in, and several of our shipments have been quite behind. So we're catching up, though. Where hopefully we'll be able to reopen some of the economy soon.
Yeah, I'm hoping. Joel and I had this conversation yesterday. We put the kids in the car and we were out and about just like doing some shopping and running some errands. And we noticed that the county that we live in, which is Davidson County, it's the county that Nashville, Tennessee is in, is still under a mask mandate, but we are one of the few that still has it. So for example, any of the surrounding counties, we live super close to the county to the east, which is Wilson. And I don't think we went into several stores and there were no masks at all.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy that it can be so different when you're so close too. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so close, and you've gone an entire year wearing masks every time you stepped outside of your house. And then all of a sudden you look around and people aren't wearing masks. It's so weird.
Yes, that would be quite the thing to see everybody without their masks again. Be like, we've gone back in time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's crazy. So tell me a little bit about your family.
Yeah, so my husband's name is actually Joel too. We have been married, it'll be 14 years in June. And we have 3 kids. Our oldest 2, Ethan and Ariana, we adopted when they were 4 and 1, and they are now 12 and almost 9. And so they've been with us for 8 years. And then we have our baby Evelyn, who will be 2 in September.
Okay, so Evelyn is pretty close in age to our son Brooks. Brooks will be 2 in June.
Oh, such a fun age, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'll tell you what though, it's a lot of work. He's still having trouble like communicating clear words and clear phrases. So I think that's a lot. That has a lot to do with the like the tantrums and the attitude. But I feel like once they start to really get words down, it helps.
Yes, when they can communicate how they feel, what they want to do, it's a game changer for sure.
Yes. So the older 2, they're biological siblings, is that right?
Correct. And it is also a kinship adoption. So their biological mom, their birth mom, is my second cousin. So we have known them basically their whole lives and have been kind of involved in a varying degree since they were born.
Okay. Can you share what you're able to share about when they entered foster care and how you became aware and how they were placed with you and how that worked?
Absolutely. So Ethan, when he was little, was apprehended, and he lived in a couple different foster homes. And then he was actually sent back to live with his biological mom. And then when Ariana was born, they were both reapprehended out of her care. And at that time, when they both came back into care, it was quite clear that they would likely not return to their mom's house. And so at that time, my aunt, their great grandma, called to ask if my husband and I would consider taking them if it got to that point where their mom's rights were severed and they were looking for an adoptive home for them. And we said, yes, absolutely. They did live about an hour and a half from our house. So they were living in a foster home until they came to our house. We are licensed foster parents. We have been licensed foster parents for almost 10 years now, and but we're licensed through a private agency. So basically here in Canada, how that works is when a Children's Aid Society is what we call it here, can't find a placement for their child within their own foster families, they will purchase services from an independent agency who hires and trains their own foster families. And so that is where our license sits, in a private agency. But we get like Children's Aid children in our home. And at the time of them moving to our house for adoption, we had a Children's Aid child living in our house, but they wouldn't accept our private agency home study as a home study. And they made us redo and become dually licensed between Children's Aid and our private agency for the kids to come to our house. So it was quite a process that meant redoing all of that. I'm sure you remember that all that home study paperwork, the police checks, the doctor forms, the references, having a worker come out to our house. And like, I'm all for making sure foster parents' homes are safe and that they have good intentions and that they have the financial means to provide for the kids. Just felt a little bit ridiculous since we had already done that entire process already and had one of their children living in our home. So they didn't end up moving in until May, and we were contacted in September asking. But the good part about that in terms of like visits and stuff was that their mom's rights had already been severed at that point because she was in agreement with them coming to her house with the view to adopt.
Okay. Wow. So interesting. So I don't think we've ever had a kinship foster parent on the podcast. So I have so many questions. First of all, the training in Canada. I'm wondering how similar that is to the United States. You mentioned the home study, so I'm assuming it's fairly similar. But when you first decided to become foster parents, did you go to in-person classes? Were they every week? What were the logistics of the training courses when you first signed up?
Yeah, so I'll speak to the private agency first because that's who we were first licensed through. So they are incredibly supportive, and they do a lot of training. Even still now, as 10 years in, we have twice a month training. One is like a foster parent support chat. And so we do it all online right now because of COVID, but it used to be in person. And then once a month, they do like a teaching or training on a topic such as trauma, such as behaviors. They bring in guest speakers. So it's quite an intensive training because we're considered therapeutic foster parents. And then when we were licensed through Children's Aid, we did the whole home study thing. And then we also they call it Pride training. I think it was like a 12 or 14-week session of weekly foster parent training where they just kind of cover all the basics of what it means to be a foster parent.
Did you do your first home study before the Pride training or after?
Correct. We did our first home study. Then we had been doing training for several years. And then the Pride training is something that all adoptive parents would have to go through. So even if they had accepted our home study from the other agency, we still would have had to complete it. And when you just foster internally for Children's Aid, you would do a Pride training as part of your training.
Okay. So all of that really does sound fairly similar. I'm not sure about the Pride training, how that works here, because we haven't yet adopted through foster care and our adoption was private, but I can relate to the 2 home study thing. So we had obviously our first home study done before we became licensed foster parents. And then when we got involved in a private adoption, they said, no, you have to have this second home study because your foster care home study isn't sufficient. And even though the foster home study I felt was basically exactly the same as our adoption home study. And I think at that point, it's kind of just about money. Like, obviously you have to pay for it. Well, here you have to pay for the home study through a private agency if you adopt. And so if you don't do that, and if you use the foster care home study, you don't have to pay them to do it. So I wonder how much payment has to do with it.
Yeah, we didn't pay for either of our home studies, but it just felt like such a waste of resources to me. Like it was at a time when we had a little foster guy who desperately could have used some therapy, and they had fully cut out all therapy for foster children because they were doing major budget cuts. And I was like, take this money you're spending on this home study and give my child some sessions. Like he could have really used some therapy. And it just seemed like such a waste of resources to do the same thing. Like you certainly could have taken that home study and just done an update to it to redo everything. Anyways, there's lots of flaws in the system.
Resources.
Yeah.
Yep. I was going to talk about this in my next episode with Joel, but I'll just give a little teaser of this absolutely terrible tantrum I went on that was extremely dramatic. But we got in the mail 2 letters, actually, certified letters that the post office had to ask us to sign for. And they were meeting notifications for meetings that had happened 6 months ago that we had been at. And they arrived at our house, and I think it cost $7 each to send one. And I'm like, okay, that's not a lot of money, but you do this 200 times a month and it adds up. Wasted resources. It makes me so mad.
Yeah, especially when you can see the impact it would have on kids, or you can see how much better that money would be spent somewhere else. But it is what it is.
Yes, it is. So what relation would they be to you prior to the adoption, the children?
They, I guess, would be my third cousins. They're my second cousin's children.
Okay, your second cousin's children. So did you have a lot of contact with their previous foster family?
So before they moved to us, we did a series of visits. So we did some of them at my aunt's house, and some of them at the foster home they were living in. So we did kind of like talk a little bit with the foster mom before they came to our house, and she was on board with them moving to our house. So it was a good relationship.
Good. Yep. I was going to ask that if there was any hope that she adopted, was there any resentment that they were moving? Because I know that's a possibility in some circumstances.
For sure. It could have been, for sure. It might have been a hard situation that way, but she was an older foster mom, like a single foster mom, and she did have 2 other kids in the home at the time. And she was not like a foster to adopt home. She was just a foster home.
Yeah. And I've also noticed too, my feelings change depending on where my foster children are going and how confident I am that that will be a good home for them. And I know I'm not the end all be all authority of what's good for a child, but if I have a foster child in my home, of course, I greatly care for them and love them. And if I see that they're going to a place where I know they're going to be loved, I know they're going to be cared for, it makes me feel so much better. Whereas if I feel like they're going back to a place that's not going to treat them well, or the possibility for them to re-enter care exists, then that's what makes it really hard.
Yeah, it's for sure a hard balance. And we always want what's best for our kids, right? And we're so grateful that she was on board with them coming to us, and she helped facilitate a smooth transition.
Good. That's so good. So I saw that you had written an article, and I started to read it before our episode, before we sat down to chat. And I started reading the beginning of it, and it sounded kind of like it was going in to be a story. And so I had to stop myself because I hoped that you would tell the story of that article and also tell us where we can find the article. How did that work?
Absolutely. So it's on a website called Love What Matters, and the platform is all about sharing stories. So they want to share people's stories. So I was able to tell the story of a little bit of our life after adoption. So before Ethan and Ariana came to our house, we obviously did all this paperwork. We did all these visits, all these back and forth. We had so much anticipation of them coming to our home. And then they had been in our house for a couple years. Little Ethan had moved so many times before coming to our home, coming into care, then going back to his mom, and then coming into care, and then also a couple moves to different foster families. So he had quite the trauma from all of those moves. And so when he was about 7 years old, we had to move ourselves. I own a business here in our town, and we were moving into a house that the business could be in and we could also live in. And he did not handle that move well at all because it was just such a trigger for all the other times he had moved. And he just really did not believe that he was going to be moving with us and that everything was going to be okay. He was super, yeah, it was so hard. He was super excited about his new room. We took him to see the house before we moved. He knew he was involved in the moving process. It wasn't sprung on him, but it was so difficult for him. And even after we moved, it took quite a bit for him to settle back down and feel safe and secure again. And so in that period of time, he began to have extreme rages. When he first moved to our house, he threw temper tantrums all the time. It was how he learned to get what he wanted, both with his birth mom and with his foster mom. The foster mom was a busy, busy home. She had older kids. She had a nonverbal autistic child in the home. And so for him to get what he needed, he threw a temper tantrum. Totally learned behavior. And that's essentially what he did, but as a 7-year-old. So his rages involved often throwing things, trying to smash things, trying to hurt us, whatever he could do to express that he was hurting. He was really sad, but he didn't know how to say, I'm sad, or I don't know how to handle this. And so everything, every emotion, every feeling came out as anger. And that started a very long process of trying to get help for a child who's adopted. it's very hard. It might be different in the States, but here in Canada, once the adoption is final, there isn't really, it's a blessing and a curse. You don't have the workers coming to your house all the time. You don't have monthly meetings. You don't have all this paperwork to submit and to do. But also when you need help, you don't have people to reach out to and ask for help. And so we had to do it kind of on our own. And we started the process of trying to find a therapist or a counselor, somebody that would help us help our son. And we reached out. We had heard about this training called Circle of Security, where it's an attachment-based training. It sounded exactly what Ethan needed. He obviously in those early years did not have a adult to attach to. So he had no sense of attachment when he came to us. I can remember clear as day, a couple years after we adopted, we were driving past the courthouse and I said, "Hey guys, look, that's where you guys went and were adopted." And he said, "Oh, that's cool. When will my next family come and get me and take me there to be adopted again?" And I was like, "No, like you don't get it. Like you're adopted. That means you're here forever." But that concept was not something he could grasp because he was always moving, something bad happens or he didn't behave or, and he packed his stuff and moved. And so the fact that he was with us forever was just, he could not grasp that concept. So we called this agency thinking like, this is it, this circle of attachment training. This is what we need. We need someone to assess his attachment and give us ideas on how to improve that attachment. And so I called and they said, "Oh, I'm sorry. We only help children who are 8 and older." And he was 7 at the time. And truthfully, he would have been 8 by the time we got off of a wait list if they had allowed us to get onto it. But they said, "No, you cannot access these services until he's 8. Try this other place." And so we called them and they said, "Oh, I'm sorry. In order to access our services, you have to use this other service first and exhaust all of their services, and then they'll make a referral to us." So I tried a third agency. I called them and we waited, I think, probably 6 weeks to get an introductory meeting with a social worker. So we went into this meeting and meanwhile, we're dealing with a child who is constantly throwing rages. And we have a 3-year-old as well at home that we don't know how to keep safe. We were constantly calling my mom to come over, take Ariana out of the house. And my business, which is a bridal store, was in the house as well. So I have customers downstairs in the main part of our house, and we have this child blowing up constantly. We felt like we were drowning and we didn't know what to do. We were committed to helping him and to figuring out what he needed, but we didn't know where to turn. So we finally got an introductory appointment with this third agency that we could get into. And Ethan and I sat in her office and she asked me all the questions. And I'm sure if you have taken your foster or soon to be adopted children to medical appointments, you know sometimes how difficult that is, because I don't know all of the information about his birth, about how many weeks he was, about whether there was any complications. That kind of information is just not something that I'm privy to. And I'm being asked them in front of him. And so there's such difficult appointments to go through because you feel like such a fake mom or a bad mom because you don't have the answers. And then she asked me if I knew whether his birth mom drank during her pregnancy. And she had that. I did know because she had reported it to the hospital staff. So that was on the paperwork that she did. And so I answered that yes, she had drank while she was pregnant. And she said, "Oh, well, that's his problem. He has fetal alcohol syndrome and that's what's wrong with him." And I was like,
that quick.
I know. He does not have fetal alcohol syndrome. He has none of this facial features. He has none of the other. He was dealing with trauma. He was dealing with the effects of moving so many times, of not having attachment. And so I left that office that day just overwhelmed, just so frustrated with it. Felt like such a broken system to me. Surely I am not the only adoptive child or the adoptive parent who has a child who has faced these kind of things. And I didn't know where to turn. And so we had to do a lot of like our own research. And then we leaned heavily on our private foster agency because they had done so much training on trauma. They were really able to help us with him, even though, he was not through their agency, but they gave us some really, really good suggestions. And then my mom's friend actually is a social worker, and she was trained herself in the circle of security. So she would come over to our house and give us suggestions. If Ethan was in the middle of a rage, I could call her and she would tell me what to do to survive that rage. And she was honestly such a godsend to us during that time, because just having someone that you could say, like, this is what we're going through, and her to say, like, you're doing a good job, keep going, hang in there, just meant the world to us and to Ethan.
Wow. What a story. So really, it came down to your personal connections and not the system or the resources that may be available to children that really helped to get you through it, it sounds like.
Right. Yeah. She was the one who gave us suggestions on how to work on his attachment. So we did a lot of rocking with him. He was 7, almost 8 by this time. But because he had never had that primary care that you give an infant, we ended up taking him back and doing some of that work with him, and just worked on really building that attachment. We made a rule that no matter where we were or what we were doing, so if we were with my family or extended family, if Ethan needed something, he had to ask us. He had to come to us, so that he would start to believe that we would take care of his needs. If he was hungry, we would feed him. If he was tired, we would put him to bed, things like that. That seems so basic and so simple, really made a huge difference in starting to build that attachment that he had never had.
That is so good to know. So I hear the term reactive attachment disorder in like adoption and foster care groups. Is that what this is, or is that something different?
So he's never been formally diagnosed with that, but certainly there would be a touch of that underlying some of this behavior. Basically, it just means he did not form the attachment in the early years to build that trust that adults will take care of you. Adults will keep you safe. Adults will meet your needs. And so he didn't have that basis of attachment.
Okay. So when he started displaying behaviors and you started noticing that, how did you know that that could be a sign of trauma or a result of trauma and not just a 7-year-old's normal kid behaviors?
Well, I mean, we never really officially knew that. We figured because it was triggered by the move that that's what was happening. But, a normal approach to parenting wasn't helping improve behavior. So we had to take another way. We had to figure something else out. And for us, that meant looking at, okay, what happened in his early years? What could this be related to? And what does he need from us right now?
Yeah. See, I think this is something that a lot of foster or adoptive parents struggle with, is just identifying what certain behaviors come from. So for example, when my son has a tantrum, the first thing I think of in my head is he having a tantrum because of trauma even before birth, of being drug exposed or alcohol exposed, or, being removed from his birth mother the day he was born and basically not having contact with her after that? Or is it because he's going to be too soon?
It is so hard to know. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think there are also a lot of foster or adoptive parents that are thinking like, okay, regardless of where these behaviors stem from, it's probably a good idea for all foster or adoptive children to have some sort of counseling or therapy at some point in their lives. But like you, I think it can be hard to find the right person, the right resources.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure. Because the unique thing about what Ethan was going through was that it was an attachment issue. It was attachment trauma. And so him going to therapy on his own and talking about it might have helped. I don't know, because we didn't really do that. But what he needed is for our relationship to be cemented, for us to grow together so that he could learn to trust us as his caregivers. And so the work we did was together. It wasn't so much like, here, you go over there and talk about your problems. It was, you need to learn to trust us. You need to know that we're here for you, that no matter what happens, you're not moving, you're not leaving our house, you're part of the Bouchards, and that means forever in our family. And so it was more working together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So, and I'm wondering, the woman who helped provide you with the advice and kind of the tactics that would be best for him, was she most of the time having conversations with you, or did she ever sit down and talk to him just one-on-one or as a group with you?
No, she never talked to him. I don't even know if he knew I was talking to someone. I would call her in the evening after he went to bed, or I would shoot her an email. And when he was raging and I called her, I would step out of the room and call her and say, like, this is what's happening. What should I do? So it was more of a support for me, more of somebody to encourage us and tell me what to do in this moment, right? She would often say, okay, go back in there and tell him, like, Ethan, I'll stay in this room with you if you will keep me safe. If you try and hurt mama, then I have to leave the room. She would give me very like specific things to do because we knew this was attachment issue. It was the push-pull, right? He wanted us in there, but when we came in, he would try to hurt us. And so it was about how do we give him what he needs in this moment, which is he really needs mama in the room, but also make sure that he doesn't have an opportunity to hurt me because he is in full fight mode right now.
Okay, that makes sense. See, the reason I'm asking if she dealt with him at all is because I'm wondering if this type of service can be available to people who may not live in an area with these type of providers close. So could I hire somebody that maybe lives in Canada or maybe lives across the country to be a resource for me? And then my second question, I guess, would be, is this particular woman available? Can she be hired?
Can we reproduce her and have her everywhere? Honestly, I didn't. She was my mom's friend and she was a social worker and she still is a social worker. She works for Children's Aid Society in this area. But she was just somebody that she knew enough about child attachment and development to know how to help me. And she was honestly a godsend. And she's honestly one of the reasons I've started doing some of this trauma and attachment work and trying to spread awareness, because if I hadn't known that what he was dealing with was trauma and attachment, I might have taken a completely different approach to his behavior and I never would have helped him attach to us. I would say Ethan is a very well attached child. Now he is such a kind big brother. He is so loving to his little sisters. He has so much potential and he's going to accomplish amazing things. He has so much resiliency, but it could have been totally different if I hadn't parent him through the lens of that trauma, if I hadn't recognized it for what it is. But I do agree that this is often, when we look at trauma and we look at behaviors in children, we often try and fix it through the child. And the greatest change came when I changed my approach, when I learned how to stay calm when he was not calm, when I learned how to work on the attachment and worry less about the behaviors. You know, part of me being a parent, and I had been a parent to a couple other foster kids before that. And I was like, children shouldn't behave like this. Children shouldn't get to talk to their parents like this. And I was just stuck in that. I only saw the behavior as behavior instead of a trauma response.
Wow. So I'm about to give the absolute worst comparison ever. So that precursor. But, and Joel and I were talking about this yesterday as well, is we were talking about if we ever got a new dog, and Joel said, well, can we send it away to like a training program? And I said, no, I don't think that's the best way to do it. I think we need to go to training courses. I mean, the dog training is kind of to train us more so than the actual dog. It's teaching us how to teach the dog to behave in certain ways or whatever. But I feel like that kind of relates to your story, is we kind of need the training. We need the counseling. We need the advice. It's not the child.
Yeah. I mean, certainly there are many, many situations where a child could benefit from therapy or from counseling. But I think our automatic go-to response is, let's get this child into the therapy, instead of addressing, okay, well, what does the family dynamics look like? What lens was I looking through? You know, what was I taught about how children should behave and how children should be consequenced? Is maybe my parenting style not a good fit for the way this child is behaving or for what this child needs in this season of life, right? There are seasons where we can absolutely, you know, we need to be parents and give consequences and have chats. And there are seasons where our child just needs to survive and we need to meet them where they're at. And it, honestly, the biggest change came from changing my approach, but also having that support, knowing that I had somebody in my corner rooting for me, telling me I was doing a good job, who I could call if I needed to. That made a huge difference because I felt so alone, right? I had gone through these agencies and I had tried to navigate this horrible system, and I was met with so many closed doors and so much frustration that I felt like, well, maybe I'm the only one who has problems with their kids. Well, maybe I'm the only one whose child has tantrums or rages, and I just don't know how to be a good foster parent or a good adoptive parent. And so having that support in that time meant more to me than anything.
Yeah. So what would your advice be to a foster or adoptive parent that's currently struggling with a child who is showing behaviors?
My first advice would be hang in there. This is so hard.
Mm-hmm.
It is overwhelming. There are days when you are going to feel like you should have chosen any other path in life than this one, but you are the mama that this child needs, and you have the strength to continue on even when you don't feel like it. And my second piece of advice would be to learn about trauma, learn about attachment, learn about how these things impact their brain and why these children go into fight flight mode, and learn their triggers. What makes them go into this mode? What do they look like before they enter fight mode? Because if we want to help them change their behaviors, we have to help them identify that. With Ethan, we had to take him and teach him feelings. It sounds so silly, but everything he felt came out as anger. So we had to help him identify, no, you feel sad. You feel sad right now. And what can we do to help you not feel sad? You are worried or you are anxious, and that's coming out as fear. That's pushing your body into fight flight mode. And the other big one that took me so long to figure out is excitement. I could never figure out, why do my kids always have trauma meltdowns on holidays, when we go away, when something exciting is coming up, but our body's response to excitement feels very similar to fear. What happens in our inside our bodies when we feel excited feels the same as when we feel afraid. And so it tricks our little bodies into going into fight mode, because that's what they feel afraid, but what they actually feel is excitement. And so we can help them begin to identify those emotions. What are you really feeling right now? Then we can change their body's response to the feeling of fear.
Wow, that is very interesting. Such great advice. Thank you so much. And as you were speaking, I did remember back, we had an episode early on, I think it was like episode 21 or 22 possibly, with a woman named Michelle Batten, and she does educating in the world of trauma and children who have experienced trauma. And she has a lot of helpful resources, both free and courses that you can pay for, resources that you can pay for. So she would also probably be a very, very good resource if other parents are out there experiencing the same thing. And it doesn't even have to be an adoptive or a foster parent. It can be a biological parent as well.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. A loss of a grandparent or a divorce, anything like that can trigger the same kind of trauma responses in children.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. Well, we're coming up on time, but I just want to say thank you so much for not only sharing your story with us and, being the rock for Ethan and helping him through it, because I feel like there are parents out there who either one couldn't figure out how to do it or would just give up. They would not necessarily give up, but stop trying to help him and never really help him through what he was dealing with.
Yes, it's exhausting work, that's for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, thank you again for your contribution, to the foster care, the adoptive world, and your contribution to my podcast. Is there anything I'm forgetting?
No, thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed being able to share my story. And if there are other foster or adoptive parents who are struggling right now with behaviors or with forming an attachment, reach out. I'd love to chat with you, but most of all, hang in there.
For sure. How can listeners get in touch with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have a website called traumainformedfosterparenting.com. You can check that out. I do blog on there pretty regularly. And then I also have a Facebook page, Trauma Informed Parenting. And I do go live every Wednesday evening to cover a topic around trauma or foster or adoptive parenting. And then I'm also on Instagram at Raising Our Fab Tribe.
Perfect. I love that you go live on Facebook. I feel like Facebook Lives are such an underrated form of media because you can just get in there and see what other people are commenting, answer questions live. I love that feature. I love that you do that.
Yeah, it's a great way to reach out. People can email me if they have a specific question they don't want to ask on the live in case they want to remain anonymous, or they can just come and it's just usually 10, 15 minutes of a parenting tip or trick that will help them on their journey.
That is so good. Thank you. I do want to let my listeners know that if you enjoyed this episode, I know you did, please consider leaving a 5-star review. Leave some words of comments and criticisms, which most of the time we definitely don't get, but I live for those comments. So thank you to those of you who take a few extra minutes to leave some comments for us. And thank you to Ruben Andrews, our podcast editor. Ruben, you've once again saved my life. And finally, Erin, last time, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. You too. Thanks, Alex.